Hey everyone, Charlie here. We're going to try to quickly look at a pretty big topic starting in Deuteronomy 32, which is the Song of Moses. Moses says, remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask your father, he'll show you your elders, and he'll tell you. He's trying to set up sort of a question for the children of Israel, but he's saying, you got to think way in the past. Ask your fathers, ask the elders. And then he says this, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance and when he divided mankind. Now we know he divided mankind at the Tower of Babel. So we're talking about what happened at the Tower of Babel, which we'll show you in just a second is not necessarily clear from Genesis 11, but he says this when he fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted inheritance, right? So what is he saying here that we have missed if we don't carefully read through the Song of Moses? And then the rest of the Old Testament especially sets this up even more clearly. But what he's saying is that the nations were put underneath the subjugation at the Tower of Babel of the sons of God. What are the sons of God? Well, they are angels or some sort of angelic beings. And many times they're even referencing, if you think back to say, Genesis 6, which I know different people have different opinions on Genesis 6, when the sons of God somehow mated with the daughters of men and created the Nephilim. And I know not everybody thinks that that's what that means, but this seems to be an instance, and you'll see this is much clearer further in the Old Testament, where God is saying, hey, when I divided the nations of Babel and I really punished the other nations, not necessarily Jacob, not Israel, but I actually put them under the authority of these angels or angelic beings. We'll go back really quickly to Genesis 11, which is the Tower of Babel account. And I just want to show you that it's not totally clear from this account, even though it's very clear that God punished the people for this. And something I've said in other videos, and I think is very much true of Genesis 3 through 11, is that Genesis 3 through 11 is sort of the whole fall account, right? We say Genesis 3 is the fall, but then look at the rest of the passage. Genesis 4, Cain murders Abel and he's marked. Genesis 5 is a genealogy. Genesis 6 is the sons of God and daughters of men. You've got Noah's Ark, and then it culminates with the Tower of Babel. And God says, they become one people, one language. This is only the beginning of what they're going to do. He sees this wickedness increasing, and he says, let's go down there and confuse their language so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them over the face of the whole earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore the name of it was called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of the earth there and dispersed them over the face of the whole earth. It's not clear, if I'm being honest, from this passage, because oftentimes when you look at further Old Testament passages that reflect on these earlier stories, you can see, I see where they're coming from. But it's not necessarily clear from this passage what Moses says then in Deuteronomy 32. But fast forward a little further into the Bible, and you can see in Psalm 82, there's a very clear reference to this. And it's actually a pronouncement of judgment. And we won't go look at Job 1, but there's something here that reminds us of Job 1. It says God has taken his place in the divine council, right? And it's interesting because we know from Job chapter 1 that God would sometimes call an assembly of his, divine council. And Satan actually is allowed to show up in this place. And that's where him and God have this whole conversation about Job. And it says, in the midst of the gods, he holds judgment, right? And these words make us feel uncomfortable. We're like, well, there's only one God. But again, gods or sons of God was often a phrase to these God-created angelic beings, sometimes even called the Elohim, right? In the Old Testament, that's what's actually being used here. But this is a judgment against them. How long will you judge unjustly, show partiality to the wicked? And it goes through and it says, you have done a bad job. And what have they done a bad job doing? Well, they've done a bad job of ruling the other nations that they were subjugated to. And it says this, you are God's sons of the Most High, all of you, nevertheless, like men, you shall die. So there's a very serious, judgment against them. And he's saying, you're not men, but like men, you will die. And then it says this, and this is the promise: "Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations." And this is a major prophetic theme through the major and minor prophets for the rest of the Bible, which is God is going to go ahead and take back all the nations, right? He's not just going to rule Israel, he's going to go ahead and subjugate all the nations. And part of it is a judgment against the sons of God that were given authority over the nations at the Tower of Babel incident. If you want to look at some other passages, you might look at Daniel 10, right, where the prince of Persia opposes a messenger of God, right? These angelic beings, these bad angelic beings, could even oppose some of God's other angels, and Michael had to be sent in to do something about it. You might look at Ezekiel 28, where there's a prophecy against the king of Tyre, the prince of Tyre, but actually it's very much a description of Satan, the way we understand him back in the garden and how he fell. And so these passages are incredible. They set up the Messiah and the story of God creating the whole world, the fall, the progressive fall of, not just man in a small way, but even the nations in a very big way. And then the rest of the Bible sets up this incredible prophecy about how God is going to go ahead and judge the whole earth, and he's going to inherit all the nations. So when Christ shows up and he starts just kicking all this demonic butt, it's a big part of the story. And then there's a lot in the New Testament. We're not going to get into that in this very short video. We just wanted to kind of set this up and explain Tower of Babel in this incident, and how it became a job of the Messiah to go ahead and displace these beings and their authority over all the nations, so they could all come underneath the headship of God and the Messiah. Thanks so much.